The earliest use of the term conservative revolution we have encountered is found in the Berlin newspaper Die Volksstimme from the 24th of May 1848. In our ring walls there is now a wonderful life. People's assemblies, clubs, association, citizen militia, itinerant booksellers, ministers capable of abdication, police-protected popular leaders, inciting peacekeepers, revolutionary reactionaries, and conservative revolutionaries, dead secret councils, actual secret corporators, uniformed policemen, living caricatures, appointed hats, and nightgowns feel anxious and fearful. The term became virulent in the German-speaking area, however only through their pragmatic use of Hugo von Hofmanthal's speech, The Literature of Spiritual Space of the Nation, from 1927. The process I am talking about is nothing other than the conservative revolution of a scope that European history does not know. There, the poets name the two fundamental processes of this revolution: the search for connection, which replaces the search for freedom, and the search for wholeness, unity, which strives away from all dualities and divisions. The term conservative revolution only became a precisely targeted political term 2 decades after Hofmanthal's speech. The mediator is the Germanist Detlev V. Schumann from Urban University, Illinois, who published an article titled Thoughts on Hofmanthalis, Concept of Conservative Revolution in an American Academy Journal in 1939. This essay falls in the hand of Hermann Rauschning and inspired him to write the book The Conservative Revolution, Attempt and Break with Hitler, which appeared in New York in 1941. Only with him does the term become home in political discourse. The attitude towards the Bismarckian Empire determined what of the German movement continues to live on after the collapse of 1918. The rift, which is symbolically represented in the case of Nietzsche, Wagner, also runs through this movement. The Second Empire is not only subjected to the criticism from Catholic, liberal, and Marxist perspectives. There is already an opposition from the right between 1871 and 1918. It is directed against the spirit of the so-called founding years, that suddenly growth of Germany's economy and military power, which the internal forces could not keep pace with. 2 distinct camps fell within this opposition: the reformists versus the revolutionaries. The reformists came in the notable form of Christian social movements, created in 1878 by Adolf Stocker, a court preacher, mending class divides with the sense of Christian community, using means of charity with the help of throne and altar. A split-off from Stoker would form as the National Socials, which seek to create a social empire. Gradually, the party would drift and reform itself towards liberalism and social democracy. The third group came in the form of Pan-German League, founded in 1891. The group refrained itself compared to the others from anchoring itself in the masses. The reality of these groups was that most, if not all, were far more entrenched with the zeitgeist of the Wilhelm era, more than they would like to admit. Racial views towards anti-Semitism, like under Dr. Ernst Henrici or Hermann Allwacht, was far more enticing than the other half measures like Stoker provided. As such, movements splintered, and by the turn of 1918 and the collapse of the empire, most of the organization was seen as old relics to the younger generations. By that point in time, most of these groups were seen to part of the problem, as a whole on the failure of the Second Reich. Through the great transformation that was Germany's defeat, these reformers ended in a similar state of the system they had attached to in order to revitalize it. The other camp, however, staunchly from its prior anti-Wilhelm in essence avoided such a faith. Though not directly a part of this movement, Nietzsche provided itself as a common source of inspiration from this side of the aisle. Despite varying views and the almost contradictory nature of the man, The conservative revolution is almost unthinkable without the work of Nietzsche. Out of these two groups emerged into the sphere unscathed by the damage wrought by the collapse of the monarchy. The ethnic movement and the youth movement. The ethnic movement, perhaps better titled the racial movement, served as a disconnected sect of the general right around the time, in kin to the social Darwinism of the Anglosphere, whether it was directly scientific use of the race or general myth of ancestry from a group or tribe. This clique of the conservative sphere would influence the idea that certain groups are conditioned by the landscape they are born in or their language. This clique would serve as a prelude to the Aryan foundation that entrenched most of the Germanic third position. The youth movement quite obviously provided a niche for the general broad demographic of up-and-coming youth adults in Germany, disillusioned with the old Junker aristocracy and detached from industrial society. It is perhaps the most remarkable of the phenomena discussed here, an uprising of youth against the world of the fathers, which is understood as Wilhelmism, against the world of appearance and artificiality, which threaten to suffocate all that is alive. The first wave of youth movement is the Wandervogel, which originated from a student hiking group created in 1896 by the high school student Karl Fischer in the Berlin suburb of Steglitz. This original Wandervogel is distinctly formless and anarchic. The adventurous attire, the Pachetin, set out from the large cities with berets and guitars, discovering unknown landscapes both outside and within. Fairly evaded all youth organizations directed by adult, whether they be gymnastics associations, Christian youth groups, or state cadet institutions. A clear objective is lacking, and is mostly rejected from the outset of petrification of the living. A second wave arrived in form of the offshoot of the Wandervogel, in the form of the Friedliche Jugend. Many members and leaders of the upcoming conservative revolution would find their beginnings as members of these youth movements, and these figures would soon evolve and grow through the outbreak of the war, joining or conscripted en masse. Many of these who fought in the battlefield of the First World War would be shaped by its effects, and ultimately would affect the sphere with its reflection on the conflict. As Ernst Jünger writes, "The war is our father. He has begotten us in the fairy womb of the trenches as a new generation. This youth has fought for the knowledge that old paths have come to an end, and new ones must be taken in the most terrible landscape of the world." The war itself was obviously sentimental points for what could be considered, at least on the psychological level, an origin of the movement. The conflict itself has been the base point for many values and key worldviews in the conservative revolution. However, from the eyes of those who participated, the general reflection on the conflict was outside the usual conventions of what was then a nationalist view on the matter. Actual political aims and even geopolitical concerns of the Second Reich were of little importance to the soldier, as it was the movement as a whole in the reflection of World War I. The sphere, the main takeaway, was a general sense of meaning the conflict provided, the disintegration of class and geographic differences between the average soldier. The sense of camaraderie and unity being part of a fighting force had famous author Thomas Mann, who in his early years was poised as a conservative, states, "Let us remember the beginning, those never to be forgotten first days when the unimagined broke in upon us. We had not believed in the war. Our political insight does not suffice to recognize the necessity of the European catastrophe. As moral beings, yes, as such we had seen the visitation coming. Even more, in some way we had longed for it. We had felt it in our deepest heart that the world could not continue like this. It was the never heard, the mighty and fervent consolidation of the nations in the readiness for the deepest examination. A readiness, a radicalization of determination, such as the history of people perhaps has not known until now. War. It was purification, liberation that we felt, and an immense hope. This is what the poets wrote of. Only this. What is the empire to them? What is trade dominion? What is victory at all? What excites the poet was the war in itself, as a visitation, as moral distress. The Great War and all of its destruction provided the greatest opportunity for the sphere. The facade that was Wilhelm era was vacant from the political floor of German thought. The defeat in 1918 offered itself, although a defeat of the German military in the Second Reich, a great victory for what was to be the Conservative Revolution. Despite the general narrative that the German right had fostered a stab-in-the-back narrative, the actual outlook of the Conservative revolutionaries paints a different picture, knocking down left-wing dichotomies that viewed the situation. For the sphere, the defeat was not only as a positive, but a necessary step. For them, they attempted to find meaning in defeat. For them, a defeat of the Second Reich would allow the true Germany to come forth from the death of this false Germany. As conservative revolutionary and father of national Bolshevism, Ernst Nikolsch puts, no beginning and no end anymore. That has always been and will always be. You have lost him the Great War, surely, but who knows if it would have been any better? For if you had won him, God would have sunk you. Pride and oppression would have been multiplied 100-fold. Empty enjoyment would have been buried all seeds of God. There would have been rapid decay. A true ascent would have been denied to you. If you had won, you would stand at the end. Now you stand before a new beginning. And one day, in hard work, preserved from all damages of easy life, you would have surpassed the point of your life's curve that the military victory would have assigned to you as the highest. In wide swings, in such an attitude lies more than just resilience against Wilhelm. It is an attitude that questions everything that has been achieved and constantly longs for rebirth and destruction. The collapse and creation of a new republic, under the condition of a post-war defeat, fostered a new environment for the young upcoming generations to be engulfed in. The first 5 years of Weimar's government was engulfed in civil wars, instigated by both sides of left and right. The Spartacist uprising, the Ruhr revolts, the Cap push, civil conflict had become the norm within society. The youth had been sanitized from the previous bourgeois culture of the Wilhelm era. The youth were now born in a revolutionary era, as such been molded by it. The destruction of civil society also paved ways for various paramilitary groups to be formed, the creation of the Free Corps and the Bund, as well as groups as the Communist Combat Association cemented this new demographic. A revolutionary type was born. The Great Divergence has set conservative revolutionaries away from the old guard, coming a new form of the Cap Putsch, centered around nationalist politicians Wolfgang Kapp. From March 12th to the 17th, he and other figures involved in this conspiracy attempted to overthrow the Republic. Due to the failure to have the Reichswehr defect and protest initiated by left-wing forces, the coup failed. The event put to rest any attempt of the old guard to efficiently attempt to reinstate the old monarchist order. From then on, the ability and focus to work within the framework of the new republic was a de facto way for the right to operate. The general environment around the right around this time was just as hectic as the situation was in Europe as a whole. Particularly within German politics itself became mired in controversies and conspiracies. The Black Reichswehr was the prime example of this. Formed by Major Bruno Ernst Buchrucker and Lieutenant Paul Schulz, the paramilitary group was used by the Reichswehr itself as a workaround due to the treaty's limitations on the army size. Comprising mainly of former Freikorps members, this eventually culminated in 1923, where the paramilitary attempt to push after Rome, in a similar vein to the Cap push. The attempt was an alas immediate failure. Afterwards, the Reichswehr minister said during his press report, "National communist bands have attempted to seize the fortress Kustrin." Ultimately, despite the original support by Sekt and his general proclivity towards nationalism, he focused rather on the military being a neutral entity within the state, although employed and in service to the state, operating and influenced by a sense of unity outside of that were the Republic in sense more so as an hibernation period.